We are here today to talk about the release of a paper from Selby Labs, which is looking at the impact of geopolitical risk on brand management, in marketing, and indeed on reputation management. And very lucky to have with me and intimately involved in the development of the paper, indeed the workshop, which we're also going to be launching today, is Dr. Elizabeth Stevens, who's an expert in geopolitical risk, indeed runs her own advisory service called Geopolitical Risk Advisory. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you for inviting me, Jerry.
My pleasure. So look, what I'd really like to do today is just to kind of put everything in context. So I guess to start at the obvious question for some people who don't know, what is geopolitical risk?
Geopolitical risk, those two words that we see on the front page of every newspaper. Now, well, geopolitical risk is the risk, i.e. the probability that international relations and events and developments between countries and governments will lead to a loss for those involved in international trade and investments, and could negatively impact on reputation and brands of international corporations.
Brilliant. So I guess, I think we all know why it's a particularly relevant topic right now, but I'd love to get your take on the events that are unfolding in front of us. Obviously, we know about COVID-19. We're still seeing the effects there in China, for example, which are not insignificant, but clearly the conflict in the Ukraine and indeed the war, let's call it what it is, and the terrible tragedies that are unfolding there are having significant impact across different areas of life. How can you put it in context for us? How significant an event is this?
Well, as you've rightly said, COVID-19 changed the world, and the Russian invasion of Ukraine has changed the world again. We're seeing more geopolitical turmoil at present than we have done since the Second World War. The response by the Western community, it would be inappropriate to say the international community, it really is the West, stance against Russia because of the invasion has led to sanctions on the central bank of a developed country. That hasn't happened in history. It's quite unprecedented. And there really is now an alignment of the West against Russia, which will, even after this war, lead to a reconfiguration of international relations and norms. We are likely to see a significant financial decoupling within the international financial system.
So do you agree with, I think BlackRock sort of called globalization. They said, look, there's a reset, and the era we've had, the uninterrupted era of 20, 30 years of globalization is over for the maybe short term, maybe forever. Do you agree with that assessment?
Most definitely. Since the end of the Cold War, particularly those of us living in the West have thought that liberal norms and globalization would continue into the future unimpeded. And we can see the rise in nationalism as a result of COVID-19, and then the Russian invasion of Ukraine has completely upended those theories. So even after the end of the current war, which may be in months, or it could actually be a stalemate that goes on for several years, the international order will not return to what it was prior to 2019.
So we are definitely at the precipice of change. I guess an obvious question is, look, what does this have to do with marketing? I think anybody who's had to manage their brand in the spotlight over the sanctions on Russia in the last few months could answer that question for us.
Yes.
Whether you're at McDonald's or Starbucks or L'Occitane. But more broadly, can you give us your own sense of why you believe, because we certainly do, that understanding geopolitical risk is relevant for marketeers?
It's relevant because we have a far more active consumer segment than we have done in the past. And that's partly thanks to the rise of social media. So the general public, particularly in Western countries, become very interested in the type of companies that they're doing business with and buying products from. So whereas in the past, a company could say, well, I have one way of operating in the UK, I operate in a different way in sub-Saharan Africa, a different way in the Middle East. That isn't possible now. Consumers take a global view of the activities of their brands. The West has come out very strongly against Russian invasion of Ukraine, and we have seen an unprecedented withdrawal of Western companies from Russia. In the West Western international business community hasn't lost so much money so quickly since the overthrow of the Shah of Iran in 1979. It is not possible as a UK, European, US company to operate in Russia without there being a backlash, either from your host, your own country, government, or from consumers.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, and I was also thinking as we started to explore how geopolitical risk, an understanding of it affects brands and reputations. I mean, one of the things that we were thinking about is that it is impossible to live up to a kind of single perspective in the world if you're operating across ideologies, that you have to respect and understand the nuances in other countries. And if you go too far in that direction, so you think, okay, right, these guys have this particular point of view, we're going to put out an ad that speaks to that over there, and we're going to behave completely differently, say, in another market, you get found out.
You do.
So the importance of taking your time to really think about how to find a sustainable position in the market has never been more important, it feels like. But I guess the question practically is, okay, well, that's great, understand that. How can brands start to get up to speed with all of these changes, with, you know, understanding geopolitics and applying it to their brands and their markets?
Well, geopolitics can seem like an amorphous concept, which would be challenging to get to grips with. But really, it can be broken down into its constituent parts. We can look at the different trends that have happened over the last 10 and 20 years, and we can look at how that's impacting on the relations between not just countries, but companies as well. And from that, we can project into the future of trends and events that might shape international relations and where companies that are operating across different markets may actually find themselves as there's an evolution in what we consider to be the norms of trade and investment.
So, I mean, I'm hearing that, and I think reflecting back on the work we've done together in building our workshop, I mean, I think what I took away was you have to start by really just understanding the basics, getting grips of, you know, it's like playing any game, you know, the rules, you got to know how it works, you got to understand some of the background. But then I guess it's about, as you say, looking backward to enable yourself to look forward.
Yes.
And try to see what's going on right now with a bigger lens and a broader context. And then I think maybe from that, starting to allow decision making to be informed by you know, these unfolding events and understanding of the world, and hopefully not getting caught out down the road. I mean, one of the things you know, final point really, but I remember very clearly was, you know, our conversation about franchising, and actually, you know, handing over a franchise to a local operator kind of makes perfect economic sense, but actually when you're crossing ideologies and you're crossing borders and there are different ideologies at work, it is a risk, because if you then need to get control back on your brand, it becomes very problematic. And we've seen that play out in Russia over the last few months. So lots to think about.
Very much so.
And how can we help? Just to give our workshop a plug before we leave.
Well, companies don't have to find themselves being victims of geopolitical risk trends and developments. At Geopolitical Risk Advisory and Selby Labs, we do run a workshop to help companies, this is individual companies, come to grips with what's happening in the geopolitical risk space today and how this may unfold tomorrow, so that they can position their brands to take advantage of these opportunities accordingly.
Perfect. Great. Thank you. That's a good place to end. And if you want to find out more, please visit selbylabs.io. In fact, contact me at info@selbylabs.io, and we will be delighted to hear from you.